Hello, and welcome back to Sleeping Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered through the shadows of Sleeping Noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. It started with small things. The kind of things you notice and brush off. Because the other option is to admit you're scared of your own life. Electronics broke more when Arjun was around. Not once in a while. Not in a way that could be explained by bad luck. It became a pattern. I had to get my laptop repaired twice in the same month, and both times it happened after he'd been at my place. My fridge went out once, too. It wasn't a minor issue either. It just stopped cooling like someone had unplugged it from the inside. I had to scramble, load bags of food into my car, and drive everything to my parents' house so it wouldn't spoil while I called around for a repair person. Arjun helped, of course. He carried bags like it was no big deal, like it was just another random inconvenience. I remember thinking it was nice to have a friend who didn't complain about that kind of thing. Then my circuit breaker tripped when he went to plug something in at my house. It wasn't even a big appliance, just a charger. The light snapped out so fast I yelped, and he laughed and apologized like he'd done something clumsy. Later, after he left, I tested the same outlet. Same cable. Same device. Nothing happened. No trip. No flicker. Everything stayed steady. I told myself it was a coincidence. Old wiring. Maybe I'd been running too many things at once and the breaker had already been close. The human mind loves explanations. Even bad ones. Because bad explanations are still safer than having none. There were other things, too. Smaller but harder to ignore once I noticed them. Arjun has always had freakishly good hearing. Like, really good. At first, it was just a funny friend trait. Something you'd tease him about. He'd hear me talking from another room and respond before I thought he could. He'd catch the end of a sentence from the hallway and quote it back word for word. I'd mumble something under my breath and he'd say, "What did you say?" and repeat it exactly, like he had subtitles in his head. I tested it more than once, because it got to the point where it wasn't impressive anymore. It was unsettling. I'd speak so quietly that even I could barely hear myself, and he'd catch it, perfectly, from outside a closed door. Not just the general idea, the exact words. He never acted like it was strange. He didn't even brag. He would just look at me like I was being dramatic and say, "You're not as quiet as you think." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was louder than I realized. That's what I kept telling myself. Then there were the mirrors. A couple times I caught his reflection doing something slightly wrong. Not enough that you could easily prove it. Just off, like it was out of sync by half a beat. Like his reflection moved a little too slow, or smiled too wide, or frowned at a moment when Arjun's face was neutral. Once I saw him in the bathroom mirror behind me. Arjun was standing in the doorway, and I caught his reflection first, before I turned around. In the mirror, he was smiling, but the smile wasn't his. It stretched too far across his face, like someone had pulled the corners of his mouth. When I turned around, Arjun's expression was normal, relaxed, almost bored. I stood there staring at him, trying to decide if I should say something. He asked me what was wrong. I told him nothing. Another time I was walking with him, and I caught in the corner of my eye what looked like him glaring at me. It was a hard look, full of anger. When I turned my head to see his face directly, I only saw the back of his head, that shaggy mess of black hair, and he was walking normally like he hadn't even moved. It was always like that. The wrong expressions only appeared when I wasn't looking straight at him. Only in reflections. Only in the edges of my vision. The second I tried to face it head on, it slipped away and became normal again. It was easy to dismiss at the time. Tired eyes, stress, too much screen time, the brain filling in blanks. And it never happened with anyone else, only him. I could live with that for a long time. Because the truth was simple. Arjun was my friend, my best friend. I trusted him. We'd been through enough together that the idea of him being something to fear felt ridiculous. So I dismissed it. Right up until last week. I drove over to his house, something I don't usually do. We normally meet somewhere else, or he comes to my place. This was supposed to be quick. On Friday, he'd forgotten some work papers at my house, and I was just dropping them off. 10 minutes, maybe less. I didn't call ahead because I didn't think I needed to. As I pulled onto his street, I saw his house right away. It's the one with the red front door, bright and clean and strange against the dull colors of the other houses. Everything else in that neighborhood blends together. Beige, gray, brown. Then there's his door, like a warning or a marker. I parked, got out, and walked up the 3 steps to his porch. The planters by the steps were broken, like they'd been knocked over and put back upright without being fixed. The white exterior of the house looked pristine, almost too pristine, like it had been scrubbed. As I reached for the knocker, I felt a tug at the back of my mind. The feeling you get when you realize you forgot something important, but the memory stays just out of reach. It made me pause with my hand hovering. I knocked anyway. No answer. I knocked again, louder, then waited. Still nothing. I tried calling him. It rang and then went to voicemail. I stared at the red door, feeling my chest tighten. Arjun wasn't the kind of person who missed calls without texting back. He wasn't the kind of person who slept through a knock on his own front door in the middle of the day. Without really deciding to, I reached for the handle. The door opened. It gave way like it had never been locked. I stood there staring into the small, dark gap, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. Arjun wouldn't leave his door unlocked. He was careful about that. Too careful. The thought hit me immediately. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe he was hurt. Maybe he was upstairs and couldn't answer. I took a shaky breath and tried to slow myself down. I told myself not to jump to the worst option. Maybe he'd just forgotten. It happens. People do dumb things. But my body didn't believe it. I stepped inside. The house felt wrong immediately. Arjun's place is open plan, so from the living room you can see most of the downstairs. Usually there's some kind of noise. A TV on low volume. Music, the sound of him moving around. The clink of dishes. Anything. There was nothing. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It was empty quiet. I called his name. Arjun? My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. No answer. I walked through the downstairs, checking corners like I expected to find someone hiding. I hated myself for that thought, because it sounded like a bad movie, but my skin was prickling and I couldn't stop scanning. Then I went upstairs. Every room looked untouched. The bed was made. The bathroom was clean. No sign of a struggle. No broken glass. No drawers pulled out. If it had been a break-in, it was the neatest one I'd ever seen. If Arjun had left suddenly, why was everything still here? His clothes were still hanging in the closet. His backpacking rucksack was still in its usual spot, packed the way he always kept it, like he was ready to grab it and go. I stood in his bedroom for a long moment, trying to force logic onto the situation. My brain kept circling around the same thought. If he isn't here, then where is he? When I came back downstairs, I realized I'd missed one room in my rushed sweep. The kitchen. It's separate from the rest of the downstairs, around a corner, so you can't see into it from the living room. That's why I hadn't noticed it right away. The kitchen door was closed, stained wood, polished but old, the wood splitting slightly in some places. A round black doorknob that looked colder than the rest of the room. I stopped in front of it and listened. Nothing. But the longer I stood there, the more a twisting feeling grew in my gut. I wanted to leave, suddenly and badly, even though I couldn't have explained why if someone had asked. It was just a door. A normal door. Still, Arjun's phone was going straight to voicemail, and this was the only place in the house I hadn't checked. I lifted my hand toward the knob. Before I touched it, a sound came from the other side. At first, my brain tried to label it as something normal, someone gagging, someone getting sick. Then it shifted into something worse, like a cat coughing up a hairball, except bigger, wetter, heavier. A hacking wretch that didn't belong in a human throat. My hand closed around the knob anyway. The metal felt strangely solid, like it wanted to keep my fingers there. I twisted. The door swung open with steady ease, almost like it had been waiting, and behind it was the basement door. I had sort of forgotten Arjun's house even had a basement. I'd never been down there. I'd never seen it open. The door was always closed and locked, and after a while you stop seeing a door if it never gets used. It becomes part of the wall. You start imagining it's a pantry or a storage closet, anything simple. But it wasn't a closet. It was a basement. A cold, concrete, windowless space hidden under the house. I hate basements. Always have. They feel like places where the world ends. Yellow-orange light spilled up the basement stairs, washing the kitchen in a dirty, fake sunset glow. It took me a second to understand why the kitchen looked so dim, even though it was daytime. All the blinds were shut. I didn't even know Arjun's kitchen had blinds. He always left them open. The hacking sound came again, louder now, echoing up through the stairwell. It was wet and violent. It sounded like something trying to cough up chunks of itself. My skin broke into goosebumps. I felt the urge to back away, to shut the door and pretend I'd never heard it. Then it retched again, and this time there was a wet thud, like something heavy hitting the floor below. Silence. Then a voice. It was harsh and raspy, like it was struggling to pull air through damaged lungs. The sound scratched at my ears. I could barely make out the words through the wheezing, and yet something about it grabbed me, because even through the inhuman sound, there was a shape to it that felt familiar. I don't know what made me walk forward. I should have left. I should have called the police and never stepped deeper into that house. But my memories of this part feel foggy, like I wasn't fully in control of myself. The best way I can describe it is that I felt pulled, like an invisible string had hooked deep inside my chest and was tugging me toward the basement door. I stood at the top of the stairs and stared down. The steps were narrow and wooden, boxed in on both sides by walls that made it feel like a chute. They led down into bare concrete. The voice came again, clearer. Fuck those bastards, it rasped. Fuck them. I hope, it sucked in air with a horrible wheeze. I hope they burn. It coughed hard after that, wet and loud, and I flinched. My heart was beating so fast it didn't feel real. And still, underneath the fear, I felt something else that made me hate myself. Curiosity. What was down there? The fact that there was something down there, something that could speak, made me rethink everything I thought I understood. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded angry. It sounded in pain. It sounded like it had a reason to hate someone. I heard quiet groans, too, small sounds of discomfort that bounced off the tight basement walls and came back up like echoes. The suffering in those noises tugged at something soft inside me. Something human. I had the sudden, insane thought that it needed help. I pushed that thought away immediately. It was ridiculous, dangerous. If something down there could make those sounds, it could probably do much worse. And even if it was injured, even if it was weak, how would I know it wasn't bait? How would I know the noises weren't meant to pull me in using empathy like a hook? The smartest thing to do was to leave, lock the door behind me, go to a neighbor, call someone, anything except stand here listening. I started thinking about running, about whether I could make it out before whatever was down there could reach me. Then, something moved at the bottom of the stairs. A hand appeared, slowly dragging itself into view. It wasn't a normal hand. It was too long, the fingers too thin. The nails were claws. The skin was bruised black and green, like rot. It was dripping with a clear gel that looked like mucus, thick and slick, shining in the basement light. It scraped along the concrete, nails cutting into the grooves. I froze so hard I felt locked in place. My stomach rolled violently, like my body was trying to eject everything inside it. I swallowed bile and tasted acid at the back of my throat. I didn't make a sound. I barely breathed. Another scrape. A low grunt. More of the arm slid into view, coated in that slick, clear goo. It oozed onto the floor and spread, staining the concrete a darker gray. That's when my brain finally caught up to what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't reaching up. It was pulling itself forward. It was coming. I ran. I have never run that fast in my life. I didn't grab the papers. I didn't shut the door behind me. I didn't even think. I turned and sprinted out of the house like my body had decided I was already dead unless I moved right then. I don't remember the drive home clearly. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I remember checking my mirrors too much. I remember feeling like the air in my car was too thin. It's been a week since that day. An hour after I left his house, Arjun started texting me. At first it was normal, casual stuff, like nothing had happened. Hey, what's up? I think I left some work papers at her place. Yo, dude, Rue asleep? You always text back so fast. I think those messages were worse than if he had sent something threatening. Because they tried to pull me back into normal life. They tried to pretend there wasn't a basement, a yellow light, a hand dragging itself across concrete. I couldn't answer. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt, and then I put my phone down like it had burned me. He started calling after that. Again and again. I blocked his number. Then he came by my house. The first time I didn't open the door. I stood in the hallway holding my breath, listening. I heard him shift on my porch, heard the faint tap of his shoes, heard him exhale like he was annoyed. After that, I kept my curtains shut. All of them. All the time. Even in the middle of the day. I stopped checking my messages completely. I told Sarah. No, there is no Sarah in this story. I told nobody. I couldn't. What would I even say? Hey, I think my best friend has something living under his house that talks like him and is trying to crawl upstairs. So I sat alone with it. And after everything I saw in that house, after the sound of that retching and the scrape of those nails on concrete, there's one thing I can't get out of my head. It's the thing that keeps me awake at night, staring at my ceiling until the early morning light starts to seep through the edges of my curtains. It was Arjun's voice. Not exactly. Not cleanly. The creature spoke in that raspy, ruined, inhuman way, like air had to fight to get out. But underneath the harshness, underneath the wet coughing and the alien tone, I heard him. The same rhythm, the same cadence, the same little pauses in the same places, the same way he stressed certain words when he was angry. It was him. I know it was. I don't understand what that means. I don't understand how it could be true. My mind still tries to reject it, like rejecting it could make it go away. I tell myself I imagined it. I tell myself fear can make you hear patterns that aren't there, but my body doesn't believe that. My body believes what it heard. And the worst part is that it forces a question I can't answer. A question that makes everything I thought I knew feel thin and breakable. How am I supposed to accept that my friend, my best friend, is a monster? Or, maybe worse, how am I supposed to accept that the monster in that basement is the real Arjun, and the one texting me and knocking on my door is only what's wearing him? Story 2. I was 9 years old when I started living alone in a half-built 7-story building in Kabul. Even writing that sentence now makes it feel unreal, like I'm describing a story someone told me instead of something I actually survived. But it happened. It was normal to the adults around me, normal enough that nobody questioned it the way they should have. My family lived somewhere else. They weren't homeless. We had a home. We had food. We had relatives. But this building was a project, and the project needed a body on site. The construction had stopped halfway through. Money ran out, or a deal fell apart, or the wrong person got angry. Whatever the reason, the workers disappeared, and the place was left open like a wound. In Kabul, an abandoned construction site doesn't stay abandoned for long. If you leave it empty, people take what they can. Metal, tools, wiring, anything that can be sold. Sometimes they break things out of spite. Sometimes they set fires. Sometimes they squat inside it. There were too many ways for the building to be ruined and too few ways for my father to protect it from wherever he was. So, he sent me. Not officially, of course. No one would say out loud, "We are leaving our child alone in a dark building to guard it." The story was always that I was helping and learning responsibility. I was told to be proud, told it meant I was trusted. The truth was simpler. I was small, quiet, and easy to place somewhere without causing questions. I was a cheap lock. There was no electricity, no finished doors, no window glass, no proper railings. The walls were raw concrete, and the stairwells were open to the wind. At night, the entire structure turned into darkness, so complete it felt thick, like you could reach out and grab it. There were no nearby streetlights, no houses close enough to glow through a window, no steady noise of a neighborhood. Just the building, tall and empty, standing in a rough part of the city where even the air felt alert. When the sun went down, the place became a different world. The wind moved through the unfinished floors and made the whole structure speak. Sometimes it whistled through gaps where windows should have been. Sometimes it slammed loose boards or shook plastic sheets that had been left behind. In the daytime, those sounds were just background noise. At night, they sounded like footsteps, like breathing, like something big shifting its weight in the dark. Every evening, I followed the same routine, because routine was the only thing that kept me from panicking. When the workers were still coming, I would wait until they left. I would watch them walk out through the front, their voices fading, their cigarette tips glowing briefly before disappearing. Once the last person was gone, I would start making my rounds. I went floor by floor, checking everything I could check. It wasn't like there were real doors to lock. Most rooms were just open rectangles. But there were makeshift barriers, wood panels, metal sheets, temporary gates, anything the wind might knock down or pull loose. If I missed something, the building would make sure I knew later. The night would turn one small mistake into hours of noise. And noise was dangerous. Noise made me look. Noise made me move. Noise made me imagine things. And if I went looking for the source of a sound, I might find something I didn't want to find. After checking the floors, I had to go down to the basement. That part was my worst nightmare. The main gate was down there, and closing it was the one task that couldn't be skipped. Without that gate shut, anyone could walk in. Not just thieves, anyone. And in Kabul, in those years, anyone included men who didn't need a reason to hurt a child. The stairwell to the basement had no lights at all. The first time I went down, I tried to bring a flashlight, but the batteries died quickly, and there was no reliable way to replace them. After that, I learned to do it by memory and touch. One hand trailing along the wall, counting steps, feeling the air get colder and damper the deeper I went. It always felt longer than it should have, like the basement moved farther away each night, like every step down was a step out of the world people lived in and into a place that didn't belong to anyone. The air down there smelled different, wet cement, rust old standing water. The echoes were louder too. Even small sounds came back at you twisted, like someone else was moving nearby. I hated touching the gate because the metal was always cold, even in summer, and it left a smell on my hands. I would pull it closed, slide the lock into place, then stand there for a moment in the dark, listening. I don't know what I was listening for. Footsteps, breathing, a second set of movements. Anything that would mean I wasn't alone. Most nights I heard nothing except my own heartbeat. Then I would climb back up, faster than I went down, pushing myself not to run because running meant panic, and panic made mistakes. My father called every night to confirm I'd locked the gate. Not because he believed in ghosts. Not because he thought the building was haunted. He called because kidnapping was real. Children from families with money disappeared often enough that people talked about it like the weather. You didn't say it could happen. You said it happens. Everyone knew someone. Everyone had a story. So I learned early how to make myself look like I didn't matter. Dress simply. Keep my head down. Don't talk to strangers. Don't mention my family. Don't mention money. Don't mention where I lived. Most of all, don't draw attention. But I was still 9 years old. And at night, I was alone in an unfinished building with 7 floors of empty space above me. I slept on a thin mattress on the top floor because it felt safer to be high up. I told myself anyone trying to get in would be heard climbing, that I'd have time to hide or escape. That was the logic I used to keep fear under control. In reality, being on the top floor just meant there were more places for sounds to come from, and more darkness around me. Sometimes I would wake up between 2 and 3 in the morning and realize I was already moving. Not half awake, turning over in bed, fully upright, walking. I would be in an unfinished hallway with my bare feet on cold concrete, or standing in a doorway, staring into a room I didn't remember entering. Once I woke with my hand on a wall, fingers spread, as if I had been using it to guide myself through the dark. Another time, I woke on a different floor entirely, my throat dry and my heart racing, with no memory of how I got there. The worst part wasn't the confusion. It was the feeling that came with it. A feeling that something was aware of me in those moments, something that noticed me the instant I became conscious. Like my waking up didn't end the night's movement. It simply made me aware of it. At first, I tried to tell myself it was normal. Sleepwalking. A child under stress. A lonely building and too many scary thoughts. My brain was trying to make sense of emptiness and turning it into threats. But then I started noticing something that made it harder to explain away. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed to happen. If I spent the day telling myself, tonight I'm going to wake up again, then I almost always did. If I tried hard to forget it, to bury it, sometimes the night was quieter. It started to feel like focusing on it was feeding it, like the attention itself was pulling something closer. That thought terrified me even more, because What do you do when your own mind feels like a door? To cope, I tried to act strong in the only way a 9-year-old can. I turned fear into a game. I turned the building into something I could control. There was a mirror in one of the unfinished hallways. It had been left leaning against a wall, tall and dusty, probably meant for the apartments once the place was finished. During the day, it looked harmless, just glass and a cheap wooden frame. At night, it was different. The first time I stood in front of it in the dark, it was just to calm myself down. I wanted proof I was real, that I was awake, that I wasn't lost in a dream. I stared at my reflection and made faces, angry faces, brave faces, ridiculous faces, trying to convince myself the fear was childish. For a while, it worked. Seeing my own eyes looking back at me grounded me. But over time, something changed. My focus would lock in so hard it felt like my thoughts slowed. The world would narrow until all that existed was the rectangle of the mirror and the faint shape of me inside it. It felt like I wasn't choosing to stand there anymore. It felt like leaving would require effort I didn't have. Time stopped making sense. I would blink and feel like only a minute had passed, but my body would be stiff, my legs sore, like I'd been standing there much longer. Sometimes I would wake up again in front of the mirror, not in bed, with my mouth slightly open and my heart beating too fast, and the air around me colder than it should have been. I started losing pieces of time around that mirror. Not full days, not clear blackouts, just gaps, moments that should have had a memory attached to them, but didn't. After a while, I stopped going near it at night. I told myself it was because it was creepy, because mirrors always look strange in darkness. But the real reason was simpler. It didn't feel like it was helping me anymore. It felt like it was changing something in me. Even during the day, I avoided it. I would take the long way around that hallway, pretending I didn't notice my own behavior. I didn't want to admit I was afraid of a piece of glass. Then one morning, everything escalated so fast that denial became impossible. I woke up late. The sunlight coming through unfinished window spaces was harsh and white. My body felt heavy, the way it feels after a fever, like sleep hadn't rested me at all. My feet were completely numb, pins and needles from bad circulation or from sleeping wrong. I shifted and felt dampness under me, cold and sticky. When I pulled the blanket off, I saw blood. Not a little. Not a smear you can shrug off. Blood was everywhere. It soaked the mattress. It streaked my clothes. It was on my hands and dried on parts of my face, as if I had wiped my mouth or nose in the night. For a few seconds, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the red-black stains, waiting for the world to snap back into something normal. My hands had small cuts across the knuckles and palms, shallow but numerous, like I'd been scraping them against something rough. My feet hurt when I stood, a deep ache in the bones. But nothing felt serious enough to explain that much blood. I looked around the top floor, desperate for a source. Broken glass, sharp metal, a nail sticking out of wood, anything. There was nothing obvious. Then I noticed the trail, drops on the concrete, smears on the wall, bloody marks leading away from the mattress like footprints that had been wiped halfway clean. I followed them downstairs. Each step made my stomach tighter. The building felt too quiet for daytime. Even the wind sounded distant, as if it was holding back. The blood continued down the stairwell, dotting the edges of steps, marking corners where someone had turned too close. It was like following the path of an injury I didn't remember receiving. The trail led to the 4th floor. That was the worst part, not because the 4th floor was different, but because something about it had always felt wrong. Even before the blood, even before the mirror became a problem, there was a room on the fourth floor that made me uneasy. The center room, open and unfinished like the others, but heavier somehow, like it held stale air. And that room had the most blood. The floor was stained in wide, uneven patches. There were smears at the height of a child's hand along the wall, marks that looked like someone had stumbled, caught themselves, kept going. It was messy, frantic, human. I stood in the doorway, staring until my eyes started burning. My hand was pressed against the wall without me realizing it, palm flat like I was trying to steady myself. And the strangest thought came to me with absolute certainty, even though it made no sense. I had been there before I woke up, not in the sense that I had walked there and forgotten, in the sense that something in me recognized the position, the angle, the feeling of standing in that exact spot, with my hand on that exact wall, as if my body remembered what my mind refused to keep. I searched the room for an explanation until my head ached. No broken glass, no jagged metal, no sharp debris, nothing that could have cut me that badly. The walls were rough concrete, yes, but not enough to produce that much blood unless I'd been rubbing my skin against it for a long time. The idea of that made me feel sick. I didn't go to school that day. I cleaned what I could before the workers arrived, scrubbing the mattress, wiping the floors, smearing stains into lighter stains. I didn't want anyone to see it and report it. I didn't want questions. I didn't want my father involved. Not because he would help, because he would punish. Because my parents were the kind of people who saw problems as disobedience. If I told them I woke up covered in blood with no idea why, they wouldn't rush to comfort me. They'd accuse me of making trouble, of being dramatic, of lying. And then they would make me pay for it. So I hid it. I became good at hiding things. Fear, pain, bruises, exhaustion. All of it. Later, I told one of my classmates, a boy who was also my friend. I didn't even tell him everything. I just said I'd been waking up in strange places and something was wrong with the building. I expected him to laugh it off, to tell me I was imagining things, to say I was scaring myself with ghost stories. Instead, his face changed. He went pale in a way I recognized. Real fear, not play fear. He asked too many questions too quickly, and he looked around like the walls might be listening. He told me not to talk about it openly. He told me I should leave if I could. He told me things he'd heard from older kids about abandoned buildings and what people said lived in them. His reaction made everything worse. Because if even he thought it was wrong, then maybe it was actually wrong. Maybe it wasn't just a child's imagination. Maybe there really was something in that building that didn't care that I was 9. After that, it didn't stop. I started waking up more often at night, always in the same hours, always with that same shallow, startled awareness, like I'd been pulled out of a dream mid-step. Sometimes I would wake on the stairs, sometimes in hallways, sometimes near the 4th floor, close enough that I could smell the damp concrete and feel my skin tighten. Even during the day, I avoided that floor as much as I could. I would make excuses to myself. There's nothing to check up there. The workers didn't leave equipment there. It's not important. But I knew the truth. My body didn't want to go near that center room. At night, I started tying a thin string around my big toe before I slept. It was a cheap trick I came up with on my own. If I started walking, the string would pull, tighten, wake me up. Sometimes it worked. I'd jolt awake with the string taut and my foot half off the mattress, heart racing. But not always. Sometimes I would wake up with the string still tied neatly around my toe, not stretched, not pulled, and yet I would be standing somewhere else in the building. Or I would wake in bed with the string broken, snapped clean as if it had been cut or torn. And the worst part was never what I could see. It was the feeling. That feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night in a place you didn't choose, and the dark around you feels occupied. Not by a visible person, not by footsteps you can point to, but by presence, by movement you can't track. Like something else is also navigating the building while you are. And it knows the building better than you do. It knows where the softboards are. It knows where the echoes hide. It knows which corners hold the deepest darkness. Most of all, it knows where you are. Even when you're trying your hardest to stay still. Even when you're trying to stay asleep. Even when you press your eyes shut and pretend your own fear isn't calling it closer. I was 9 years old, alone in an unfinished building, learning a lesson I never should have learned so early. That being awake isn't the same thing as being safe. Story 3. I have always loved Edinburgh. The hills, the old stone, the castles, and the city's history, which is both rich and brutal. Even before I ever visited, I used to read about it the way some people read about shipwrecks or abandoned hospitals. Not because I enjoy suffering, but because Edinburgh carries this sense that the past isn't fully past. It sits close to the surface. If you don't know much about the city, there are stories that stick with you once you hear them. There were huge fires at points in Edinburgh's history, and at the same time, there were people living underground in vaults. Those vaults were originally built for merchants to store goods, but they weren't very useful for that because of the rock they were built into. The stone is porous, and Edinburgh is wet. It rains constantly. Anything you stored down there could absorb moisture and spoil, but people still ended up living in them. From what I've read, homelessness wasn't just looked down on back then. It could be treated as a crime. People could be punished brutally for it. So instead of being out in the open, people hid wherever they could, and those abandoned spaces under the city became a place to disappear. The horrifying part is what happened during fires. The heat didn't stay above ground. It seeped down through the rock into the vaults. Those underground rooms turned into ovens. People didn't just die. They cooked. They melted alive. Then there's the whole subject of witchcraft, which was everywhere in that era. The witches weren't witches in the movie sense. Most were people who knew herbs, who understood basic healing, who tried natural remedies when medicine was still crude and scary. But none of that mattered once fear took hold. Kings and courts and church leaders decided there were enemies everywhere. People were accused and dragged into the streets and executed publicly. It became normal to watch human beings die as entertainment and warning. Those stories fascinated me for years. They made the city feel like a place where the air itself might remember. So when I finally got the chance to visit Edinburgh in December 2022, I was genuinely excited. I didn't want a relaxing vacation. I wanted the full experience, the scenery and the darkness, the beauty and the history that makes your skin crawl if you think about it too long. Originally, it was going to be 4 of us, 2 of my friends, my girlfriend at the time, she's my wife now, and me. A 3-night, 4-day trip. We planned it as a mix of scenic walks and creepy tours. One of the things we booked was a midnight tour of an Edinburgh cemetery that's often described as one of the largest in Europe. We were also just going to roam, see the old streets, the steep hills, the stone buildings that look like they've been standing there since the world began. At the last minute, one of my friends backed out. Nothing dramatic, just life getting in the way. So it became 3 of us. The first 2 nights, we stayed in a hostel. It was exactly what you'd expect. Cramped, loud, a little chaotic. But fun in that way hostels can be when you're traveling with people you like. Then for the final night, we had booked an Airbnb with 2 bedrooms, mostly because we wanted one night where we could spread out, sleep properly, and not deal with strangers coming in and out at all hours. For the first 2 days, Edinburgh was everything I wanted it to be. The vibe of the city matched what I had built up in my head. The weather was cold and damp in a way that made everything feel sharper. The stone looked darker when it rained, Even the touristy areas had that heavy old world feeling. I loved it. Nothing felt wrong. Not until the final night, when we moved into the Airbnb. We checked out of the hostel around 12:30 in the afternoon. The hostel let us store our luggage for the day, so we left our bags there and spent the afternoon and evening walking around, exploring, eating, just enjoying the city. By the time it got to around 7 or 8 p.m., we were tired and ready to settle in. We went back, grabbed our luggage, and walked to the Airbnb. It wasn't far, and our suitcases had wheels, so it was easy enough. The only issue was the flat was on the third floor, and there was no elevator. I was the only guy in the group, and I did the obvious thing and offered to carry the bags up. I said I'd take the lighter ones first and then come back for the heavier ones. No big deal. Just a few flights of stairs. I went up alone. The door to the apartment was dark gray, and right in the center was a metallic number 3 screwed into the wood. I remember that clearly. The number looked cold, like it had been touched too many times by too many hands. I unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something was wrong. It wasn't like I saw anything. There was no obvious threat. But my body reacted before my mind could explain. The first thing that hit me was the feeling that I was being watched. Not in a vague, this place is unfamiliar way. In a direct, focused way, like someone was already aware of me the second I crossed the threshold. I had this immediate urge to check everything. Windows, balcony doors, locks. As if I needed to prove to myself there wasn't anyone else inside. I didn't want to admit I felt afraid, so I told myself I was being responsible. But it was pure instinct. The apartment was clean, like professionally clean. You could tell the owner had sent a cleaner before we arrived. It had a strong theme, too, sort of 1980s retro, but in a curated way. The kitchen had modern appliances designed to look old, like a pastel Smeg toaster with rounded edges. Everything looked like it had been chosen carefully. The dining table was spotless. 4 chairs were evenly placed. Utensils were neatly lined up beside plates, as if someone had set it for a photo. Nothing was out of place. No crumbs, no dust, no fingerprints. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, it felt staged. Not like a place someone lived, but like a place prepared for someone to enter. I walked into the bedroom that my girlfriend and I were going to use. It was the bigger one. And that's where I saw the first thing that didn't fit. The wardrobe was empty, and one of its doors was wide open. By itself, that wouldn't normally matter. A cleaner might not think to close it. Or maybe it had drifted open. But the rest of the room was so tidy, so carefully arranged, that the open wardrobe door felt like a mistake that shouldn't exist. If someone had taken the time to line up forks and spoons neatly at the table, why leave a wardrobe gaping open? I stared at it longer than made sense. I couldn't stop staring. It drew my attention like a magnet. That was when I heard my girlfriend and my friend coming up the stairs, talking and laughing in that tired, happy way people do after a long day walking. Their voices snapped me out of it. I quickly walked over, shut the wardrobe door, and went back out into the living room as if nothing had happened. When they came in, they were impressed by the place. They commented on how nice it looked. They didn't feel anything wrong. They didn't mention anything strange. To them, it was just a clean Airbnb in a pretty city. I tried to match their energy. I started carrying bags into our bedroom. As I walked back and forth, I noticed something else, something I had somehow missed during my first quick scan of the apartment. The 2 bedrooms were right next to each other. They should have shared a common wall. That's what makes sense in a normal layout. But from the living room, you could clearly see there was a gap between them. Not a tiny gap, not a weird angle, a real space. Enough space that you could fit a small storage room between them. A whole extra section, that didn't match the shape of the apartment. I stopped and looked closer. My skin went cold. There was something there. A door. It had been covered with wallpaper, but not in a way that truly hid it. The outline was still visible if you looked. The edges pressed through slightly. The shape of the frame was there. It looked like someone had tried to disguise it quickly, or like they didn't care if someone noticed. That is when everything I had been trying to ignore rushed back in at once. The watched feeling, the open wardrobe, the stage-clean apartment, and now a door that didn't belong. I got goosebumps over my arms and neck. I need to explain something about myself here. Ever since I was a child, I've had these moments where I walk into a place and I just know something is wrong. I can't prove it. I can't always explain it. It's rare. In 30 years, I've felt it maybe 3 times. It isn't anxiety. It's not the normal discomfort of being somewhere new. It's a clear internal warning. This was one of those moments. Standing there in that Airbnb, I felt it as strongly as I ever have. What kind of Airbnb has a covered-up door between bedrooms? Why would someone wallpaper over a door instead of removing it properly? And why did it feel like the apartment noticed me the second I walked in? By the final night, we were exhausted from all the walking, so we decided to order food in. We wanted to sit at the dining table, use the fancy cutlery, enjoy the last night. We ate, talked, laughed, tried to keep it light. But I couldn't stop thinking about the wardrobe, and I couldn't stop thinking about that hidden door. And the watched feeling never left. If anything, it got worse as the night went on, like the longer we stayed, the more present it became. Eventually, we cleaned up and went to bed. Our bedroom was the larger one. It was long, with 2 massive windows on the left side, both covered with blackout curtains. The bed's headboard was placed against the wall, and that meant the hidden room, whatever it was directly behind the head of the bed, on the other side of the wall. At the far end of the room, there was a couch. Next to the couch was the wardrobe. That wardrobe matched the theme of the apartment. Old-fashioned, heavy-looking, the kind of wardrobe you'd expect to see in a horror movie. It was about 3/4 the height of the wall, with a Victorian feel to it. Dark wood, slightly ornate edges. We were so tired that my girlfriend and I fell asleep almost immediately. Then, things escalated. I woke up around midnight with that same feeling of being watched. My heart was racing. My breathing was heavy. I was awake, but I kept my eyes shut. I was genuinely afraid that if I opened them, I would be looking at someone, or something, staring back at me. I lay there for a moment, trying to calm down, telling myself I was dreaming, telling myself it was the city stories getting into my head. Still, I opened my eyes slightly, just enough to see through my eyelashes. My gaze went straight to the wardrobe. The wardrobe door was open again. Not wide, just slightly, like someone had pulled it open a few inches. For a second, I thought I saw something hanging over the edge of the door. Long, black hair. My whole body went cold. I slowly moved my eyes upward, barely daring to. And then I saw it. Pale, white hands gripping the top of the wardrobe door. A white robe, and a face hidden behind a curtain of hair. Someone was crouched on top of the wardrobe, balanced there, looking down at me, watching me. I could not move. I couldn't even decide what to do. My mind was screaming, and my body was frozen. I think my breathing got louder without me realizing it, or maybe my heart was pounding so hard it shook the bed. It woke my girlfriend up. We'd been together 8 years at that point, and I had told her about my intuition moments before, the times I'd walked into places and felt wrongness like a physical thing. So when she asked what was wrong, I didn't try to hide it. I couldn't. I told her there was someone on top of the wardrobe. I told her what I was seeing. She looked where I was looking. She couldn't see anything, but she could see me. She could see how fast I was breathing, how wide my eyes were, how terrified I was. Without arguing, she reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The room filled with warm light, and the figure vanished instantly. The way it vanished is hard to explain because it didn't behave like a normal thing disappearing. It didn't fade. It didn't slide away. It felt like a glitch in a video, like the world skipped forward a couple frames. One moment it was there. The next moment, it wasn't. We sat up in bed with the lamp on, staring at the wardrobe. The door was still slightly open, as if it had never moved. There was nothing on top, nothing on the floor, no sound, no sign that anything had ever been there. We decided to keep the lamp on for the rest of the night. Eventually, somehow, I fell asleep again. Later, I woke up again with a watched feeling, but this time it was worse. The lamp was still on, but it didn't help. If anything, the dread felt heavier, more direct, like the light had made it angry or made it move closer. My heart started racing again. My breathing got heavier. I stayed still, eyes closed, trying to convince myself it wasn't happening. I was lying on the right side of the bed. Without opening my eyes, I reached my left hand out and touched my girlfriend's arm. She was there, warm and real, asleep beside me. And that made it worse, because I could sense someone else, right next to me. Standing by the bed, a woman, the same woman, the one who had been crouching on top of the wardrobe. I didn't see her with my eyes. I felt her the way you feel someone leaning too close in a crowded space, the way your skin notices before your brain does. I could feel her leaning over me, looking down at me. Her long hair felt like it was inches from my face. I was terrified that if I opened my eyes, I would be staring straight into hers. I don't know how long I lay there like that, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. Thank God my girlfriend woke up again and realized something was wrong. She whispered my name and asked what was happening. I told her quietly that the woman was standing right next to me. That scared her too. I could hear it in her voice. But she still got out of bed. She turned on every light in the room. Even with my eyes closed, I could tell the room flooded with brightness. And again, the figure vanished. Just gone. Like there had never been anything there. We spent the rest of the night with all the lights on. Neither of us really slept after that. We just stayed close and waited for morning, listening to the normal sounds of a building settling, trying to convince ourselves that normal sounds were all there was. The next morning, we had plans, and we checked out quickly. We went about our day like nothing had happened, because what else do you do? We were in a foreign city, tired, and we still had a flight home. We didn't want to spiral. We didn't want to ruin the trip for our friend. My other friend had slept alone in the second bedroom. She scares easily when it comes to horror stories, and my girlfriend and I didn't want her to spend the rest of the trip panicking. So we didn't tell her anything at the time. We told her months later. She said she felt completely fine that night. She slept like a baby. No weird dreams, no feeling of being watched. Nothing. I haven't had an experience like that since. I've even been back to Edinburgh again because I still love the city. I didn't stay in that Airbnb, obviously, and nothing happened. Nothing even close. But I still think about that night. I still think about the wardrobe door, the covered-up door between the bedrooms, and the way the figure on top of the wardrobe vanished like a broken piece of reality. Even writing it down brings back the physical memory of it, the way my body felt in those moments, the fear sitting heavy in my chest, the relief of the light, and how grateful I was that my girlfriend, my wife now, was next to me, awake, turning on lamps, making the room bright enough that whatever. It was couldn't stay. Story 4. I'm a regular police officer in a northern state in Mexico, close to the U.S. border. I'm not a homicide investigator. I'm not part of any elite unit. I don't get assigned to the kinds of cases you see in movies. Most days I'm traffic. Sometimes I'm security at events when civil protection requests police presence. That's it. I'm telling you that first because I need you to understand how far out of my depth I was when this happened. Also, because what I'm about to describe is sensitive and illegal to share, even anonymously. I'm going to keep names and locations vague, but I still don't feel safe posting this. I've been asking myself all week if writing it down is basically signing my own death certificate. But I can't sleep anymore. I keep replaying the same images in my head, and when I finally do drift off, I wake up sweating, convinced I heard a vehicle idling outside my building. So if something happens to me, at least there will be a record somewhere that explains why. Everyone knows the biggest tragedy in this country is insecurity. Organized crime has its hands in everything. Whether it's the government's fault, whether it's corruption, whether it's incompetence, people argue about that forever. I'm not here to argue. I'm only saying this because it's the background noise of our lives. You grow up learning which roads to avoid at night. You learn which businesses have men watching the door. You learn to look away when you see something you're not supposed to see. I thought I was good at that. Then, one night on patrol, I saw something I can't unsee. It was a normal shift. I was riding with my partner, who I'll call Anders. We were doing traffic patrol, nothing special, nothing dramatic. The streets were quiet, the air warm, the kind of night where your brain starts drifting because nothing happens for hours. We saw a gray van speeding. We tried to stop it. The driver didn't slow down at first. We followed for a couple of blocks. Siren, lights, the whole thing. Finally, he pulled over, but not smoothly. He stopped like he'd been arguing with himself whether to run. I got out of the patrol car and started walking toward the driver's window. As I approached, I glanced at the van's rearview mirror and caught the driver's eyes. He looked terrified, not angry, not drunk, not annoyed, terrified. His eyes were wide and wet like he'd been running for his life. For a second, we held eye contact through the mirror, and I felt my skin tighten because the fear in his face didn't match a simple speeding stop. It looked like the fear of a man who knows something is behind him, and it's going to catch up. I approached more carefully. I slid my hand toward my weapon, not drawing it, but ready. Then the driver's door burst open and the man jumped out. He was short, messy hair, casual clothes, nothing that screamed danger on its own. But the movement was sudden and desperate, and it caught me off guard. I went into a defensive stance for half a second, and then, if I'm being honest, fear took over. We don't have great training. People joke about us and call us Maricon, like we're instant cops. 6 months of training, and then they give you a uniform and a gun and act like you're ready. You learn the basics. You learn enough to do tickets and crowd control and simple detentions. You don't learn how to handle a situation that feels like it belongs to another world. So when he jumped out like that, I did something I'm not proud of. My first reaction was to move away from him and hide behind the van. Anders didn't do that. Anders sprinted. He ran past me full speed and chased the man down the street. I stood there, half behind the van, my mind blank, scanning the dark like I was waiting for another surprise. That's when I heard banging from the back of the van. The sound came from the rear doors, right where I'd been standing seconds earlier. Hard, frantic hits, like someone kicking from the inside. It wasn't a loose object rolling around. It wasn't the rattle of a toolbox. It was too intentional. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, drew my weapon, and reached for the rear door handle with my other hand. My breathing got shallow, and I had this strange, unreal thought that maybe there was an animal in there, something big, something trapped. I pulled the door open. It was dark inside, but under the streetlights I saw small points reflecting back at me. At first it looked like when you shine a light into a yard at night and see a cat's eyes. Then I realized they weren't animal eyes. They were human eyes. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it inside the van. There were people in there. Not adults, small people, kids. At least a dozen from what I could see in that first sweep of the beam. Mostly girls. Their hands and legs were tied. Their mouths were sealed with tape. They were packed in the back like cargo, cramped together, some lying sideways because there wasn't enough room. The flashlight made them squeeze their eyes shut and turn away. But even with their faces half hidden, I could see fear so raw it didn't look real. When they looked back at me, it was like they were begging without making a sound. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I don't mean I was stunned like a normal person seeing something horrible. I mean, I felt something pressed down on my mind, like a heavy hand forcing a decision. A terrible, unnatural urge to close the door, to turn off the light, to do what I always do in this country when something doesn't concern me and I want to live, pretend I never saw it. My hand actually lowered the flashlight. I shut it off because the light was hurting them, and because, in that moment, it felt like the light was also making me visible. Like the flashlight beam was a signal that could be seen from far away. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at those faint points in the darkness. Then Anders came back, out of breath, and stopped beside me. "What the hell?" he said, panting. I didn't answer. I didn't even turn to look at him. I let him see it himself. He leaned forward, and when his eyes adjusted, he whispered, "Holy shit," and then he started cursing, rapid and angry, over and over. "Did he get away?" I asked, still staring into the van. "Yeah," Anders said. I couldn't catch him. He swallowed, trying to get his breath back. But he dropped his phone. "We can find him with this." He handed me the phone. That snapped me back into action. My brain switched to something it understood. A device, information, a trail. I glanced back at the kids, then down at the screen. The phone was unlocked. Google Maps was open. A route was set, leading toward a place in the middle of nowhere. Dirt roads. No clear destination name, just a point on the map like a pin pushed into blank space. I'm not good at fighting, but I can work a phone. I opened his history and felt my blood go cold. The list was full of searches and locations that made no sense until you saw the pattern. Orphanages, churches, schools, hospitals, and then coordinates and rural points far from town. Places with kids. Places with trust. Places where no one questions a man with a van. It clicked in my head like a lock turning. He wasn't improvising. He had a system. He'd pick up children from places where they could disappear quietly, and then he'd deliver them to whatever location he was sent that day. The drop points changed constantly, so no one could establish a routine. Anders muttered, "They're coming." He said it like he wasn't talking about backup. He said it like he meant someone else. He walked toward one of the girls, speaking softly, and carefully peeled the tape from her mouth so he wouldn't rip her skin. The second her mouth was free, she started crying in a way that didn't even sound human. It was desperate, broken, like she'd been holding it in for too long. "Easy," Anders said, trying to calm her. "You're okay now. You're safe." There was something wrong with his voice when he said that. It sounded rehearsed, like he was reading a line he'd said before. For a split second, I wondered if he even believed it. I heard sirens in the distance. Backup. I only had a small amount of time with that phone before someone higher up arrived and took over. And I knew it. This wasn't going to be handled by traffic cops. At least that was what I told myself in that moment, because I still believed there were rules. I moved fast. I opened messages. I checked calls. I scrolled like my thumb was on fire, looking for names, numbers, anything. I pulled out my notebook and started writing down what I could. Phone numbers, coordinates, usernames, bits of conversation. I saw Anders watching me. His face tightened, like he didn't approve, like he wanted to stop me, but he didn't say anything yet. One phrase kept repeating in the messages. It showed up again and again, like a code or a request. Wants to observe. I wrote that down too. Then a patrol car pulled up beside us, and two agents got out. State Investigative Police, from their uniforms. I didn't recognize them, but that isn't unusual. Different agencies. Too many people. Still, something about them felt wrong the moment they stepped into the light. They didn't look surprised by the van. They didn't ask questions. They walked up with calm faces and a kind of confidence that said they already knew what they were looking at. "You can leave now," one of them said. "Not thank you. Not we'll take statements. Not stay here. Just you can leave now." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. I hesitated, half expecting more units to arrive. I expected federal police, National Guard, municipal supervisors, someone to secure the area properly. But nobody else came. Only those two agents. Anders put a hand on my shoulder and leaned in slightly. "Let's go," he said. The urgency in his eyes told me more than his words did. He wanted distance. He wanted us out of that scene before something else arrived. So I got back into the patrol car. Anders drove. We didn't speak for a while. The cabin felt too small. The silence felt heavy. My head was full of those eyes in the dark and the way the girls' bodies were packed together. Finally, Anders spoke. "That thing," he said, not looking at me, "throw it away." He meant my notes. I turned to him. "Where are you going?" I asked, because he'd made a U-turn. "Aren't we going to look for that guy?" "No," he said. "We're going back to the station." His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "And I'm giving you advice. Don't say anything about what we just saw. Don't ask anything. And I'll repeat it. Whatever you wrote down, throw it away. Burn it. Forget it." My blood boiled. I wanted to scream at him. Kids were tied up in the back of a van, and he wanted me to forget it? But another part of me understood what he was really saying. This wasn't a normal crime. This wasn't a normal arrest. And whatever those two agents were, they didn't want witnesses who remembered details. I went through the rest of my shift like a robot. When it ended, I left the station without talking to anyone. I went home but stopped on the way, checking local Facebook pages. My city has amateur journalists who show up everywhere with phones, live streaming accidents and shootings, chasing sirens like it's entertainment. There was nothing. No posts, no photos, no exclusive, not even a rumor. It was like the whole event had been erased from the city's memory. I stopped at an OXXO, bought a cheap phone and a new SIM card, and went home. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't throw away the notes. At home, I sat at my table with a notebook open and looked at the number I'd written down, a contact that appeared repeatedly in the escape driver's messages, a number that looked like a doorway if you were reckless enough to step through. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about what to say. Then I thought of those eyes again, those small points in the dark, begging. And I remembered the phrase, "wants to observe." My hand shook as I typed the number into the new phone. I wrote one message. "I also want to observe." Then I hit send. The moment the message left my phone, I felt the stupidity of what I'd done. Cold sweat broke out on my back. My heart started pounding so loudly I could hear it. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I sat there, holding the phone like it might burn me. I tried to tell myself I'd sent a message into the void, that the number was dead, that nobody would answer. Then the phone vibrated. The sound and sudden movement hit me like a punch. My stomach dropped, and my fingers went numb. An SMM's notification. It was an image. The picture was very dark. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. The phone auto brightness adjusted, and I saw a person standing close to the camera. His face was hidden in shadow, positioned so the light never reached it. But something around his neck was framed clearly, like he wanted it to be the center of the image, a necklace. It looked like a rosary, except the beads weren't beads. The mysteries were too large, heavy shapes hanging in a loop. I zoomed in. My stomach twisted hard enough that I gagged. They were eyes. Eyeballs, strung together. You could see the wet shine. You could see the pale cords trailing behind them, like optic nerves, tied with a thin cord to keep them in place. The photo was composed so that necklace was sharp and unmistakable, like proof, like a signature. I stared at it, sick, and only then did I notice what was behind him. Two faint, glowing points. I turned my brightness all the way up and leaned closer until my nose almost touched the screen. In the background, barely visible, there was a chair. And on the chair, a small child, tied up. And those glowing points were the child's eyes, reflecting whatever tiny light source was there, the same way eyes had reflected in the van. Another message arrived, a string of letters and numbers that didn't mean anything at first. Then, my eyes caught the beginning, BC1Q, Bitcoin, a wallet address. My mind spun. The whole thing didn't fit together. He was asking for money, but he was sending messages by normal SEMs, which can be traced. He didn't care. It was like he wanted me to know he wasn't afraid of being tracked, or he knew the tracking wouldn't matter. Or worse, he knew he was protected. I thought about Andres again, his warning, the urgency. The two agents who arrived alone and told us to leave, the way the city's news had nothing, like the night had been swallowed. Maybe it wasn't that the man didn't care about being traced. Maybe he knew exactly who would see the trace, and that those people were on his side. I sat there, staring at the phone, barely blinking. I don't remember how long. My body felt cold and heavy, like I'd been submerged in ice water. Then another message came. A video. My fingers trembled as I held the phone closer. It felt heavier now, like it had weight beyond plastic and metal. My room was quiet, but my ears rang like pressure changes before a storm. As I stared at the thumbnail, the lights in my room flickered. It was subtle at first, like a normal electrical hiccup, but it happened twice, then again, and the timing made my skin crawl. At the same time, I felt a cold air move through the room, like someone had opened a door behind me. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself anything to make my thumb stop shaking. Then I pressed play. The man was in frame again. I couldn't see his face, only his chest and that necklace of eyes. The camera was close enough that the eyes filled the screen, shiny and wrong. The man lifted his hand and touched the first one like it was a prayer bead. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. First mystery. The image blurred suddenly, like a sensor filter had been applied. The center of the frame became a shifting, blocky smear. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I could hear it. A scream, high and small. The kind of scream that tears itself out of a child's body when there's no other way to express pain. It went on and on, then broke into sobbing, then rose into screaming again. The man's voice continued, low and steady. like he was praying through it. I gripped the phone so hard my fingers hurt. My whole body shook. Even without seeing anything, my mind built the images anyway, because sound is enough when you know what's happening. I don't know how long the video lasted. Time didn't work right. It felt endless. It felt like the room shrank around me. I dropped the phone and stood up fast, trying to get to the bathroom, but my legs didn't cooperate. My stomach clenched violently. I vomited in the hallway. Half-digested dinner spilled onto the floor, and the smell made me gag again. I leaned against the wall, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to convince myself I was still in my apartment and not inside that video. Then the phone made noise again, not a message tone. Ringing. A call. I could feel the vibration through the floor even before I picked it up. It buzzed like a living thing. I don't know why I answered. I swear it felt like my finger moved on its own, like something pushed my hand through the motion. I picked up the phone, brought it to my ear, and hit answer. For a moment, there was only breathing on the other end. Slow, controlled breathing. Then a voice, low and close, like he was speaking right beside me. "You still want to observe," he said. Story 5. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I meant it when I said it. After the last time, I turned down 2 more bookings at that place without even thinking. I made up excuses that sounded professional. Scheduling conflict. Not feeling well. Another gig. Anything that didn't sound like, "I'm scared of a room with cracked mirrors and a woman who keeps showing up in the wrong places." I tried to treat it like a bad night. Like something that happened because it was late, because the lights were low, because the music was loud, and my nerves were already stretched thin. I told myself the feeling I had was just adrenaline mixed with imagination. I told myself I didn't need the money that badly, and I definitely didn't need whatever the velvet haze had going on behind the scenes. But I couldn't stop thinking about her, about Marla, about the photo I found, about the way she talked to me like she already knew me. Not like a stranger meeting a performer for the first time, but like someone who'd been waiting for me to show up. Like the conversation had started long ago and I was just now catching up. And then there was the other thing, the detail I didn't admit to anyone, because saying it out loud made it sound ridiculous. The sense that she wasn't simply flirting or being dramatic. The sense that she was paying attention in a way that didn't feel human. Like she wasn't just looking at me, but through me, measuring something. I tried to leave it alone. I really did. But a few days ago, I went back. I didn't go dressed for work. No makeup, no lashes, no heels, no carefully built version of myself. I wore jeans and a plain top, hair pulled back. I told myself that if I went as me, not the stage version, it would make it less real somehow. Less like I was walking into the same scene again. I also went during the day. Not at night, not when the place could hide in its own atmosphere. I went in daylight because daylight is supposed to fix things. Daylight is supposed to be the truth. I told myself whatever I'd felt before was a nighttime thing, a performance thing, a nerves thing. The velvet haze looked wrong in daylight. At night, it had felt like a place that lived, a place with heat and breath and chaos. In the day, it looked tired, like a set after the actors have gone home. The sign over the entrance was still there, but it didn't pop. The paint looked dull. The windows looked like dead eyes. I didn't go in through the front. I went around the back, through the alley where performers and staff come and go. The alley was empty. No music leaking out. No voices. No laughing group of people smoking. No crowd spilling into the street. Just bins lined against the wall, damp concrete, and that smell again, the one I couldn't fully place the first time. Something powdery and old-fashioned under the usual scent of garbage and wet brick, like perfume that had soaked into the building over years and refused to leave. I hesitated before I went inside, the way you hesitate before touching something you know is going to be colder than it should be. Then I pushed the door open. Inside was worse. The lights were on, technically, but dim. Not the warm, intentional dimness of a club getting ready for the night. More like they hadn't bothered turning everything up because no one cared. There was no music, no TV, no background noise to make the silence less sharp. Just a low hum, like the building itself was holding its breath, or like some old electrical system was still running even though the place was closed. There was an older guy behind the bar, drying glasses with a towel. He looked up just long enough to register that someone had walked in, then went back to his work like he'd already decided I didn't matter. Closed, he said, flat as a wall. I know. I told him. I kept my tone light, casual. Like I did this all the time. I performed here a few weeks ago. I think I left something backstage. He didn't ask what. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't say I couldn't go back there. He just shrugged, eyes sliding away like the conversation was already over, and continued polishing the glass in his hands. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. It made me feel like the rules were different in this place, and I didn't know them. I walked toward the hallway that led to the dressing rooms. It felt longer than I remembered. The silence made it stretch. My footsteps sounded too loud, too clean, like they didn't belong. Each step echoed off the walls and came back at me slightly delayed, like someone else was walking half a beat behind. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was just searching for closure. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I hadn't actually left anything important there. I just needed to see the backstage area in daylight. Needed to prove to myself it was just a shabby club like any other shabby club. The green room door was open a crack. I stopped with my hand hovering near it, listening. Nothing. I pushed it open. Inside, everything looked the same. The cracked mirrors, the makeup lights with some bulbs burned out, the counter with old stains that never fully came clean, the wigs on foam heads lined along the shelf, staring forward with that blank, human-shaped absence that always makes your stomach tighten if you look too long. But the room felt different. It felt empty in a way it hadn't before. Not no one is here empty. More like someone was here recently empty. Like the air still held the shape of a presence that had just stepped away. I stood there for a moment and forced myself to breathe normally. Get in, look around, leave, I told myself. That's it. I started checking the obvious places. Under the counter, inside the drawers, on the shelves. I moved things carefully, not because I was looking for anything valuable, but because I didn't want to make noise. I don't know why I didn't want to make noise. The thought just appeared in my head, fully formed. Don't announce yourself. That's when I saw it. A cigarette on the counter, just sitting there like it had been placed on purpose. No pack nearby. No ashtray. No lighter. Nothing else that would explain it. It looked out of place in a room that was supposed to be unused during the day. There was a faint smear of lipstick on the filter, dark and neat, like someone had pressed it there and meant for it to be seen. I stared at it for a long time, a ridiculous amount of time for a cigarette. I could hear my own breathing in the silence. I could hear the hum of the building. I could feel the tiny muscles in my shoulders tightening like I was waiting for something to happen. Then I reached out and picked it up. It felt warm, not burning, not fresh from a mouth hot, but warm like it had been held in someone's fingers not long before I walked in. Warm like it had been in a pocket. Warm in a way that made no sense in an empty room. My throat tightened. That's when I heard something behind me. Not a voice, not footsteps, just the smallest sound, like fabric shifting, like someone adjusting their weight in a chair, like the faint slide of clothing over skin, I turned around fast enough that I expected to see someone standing in the doorway. The room was empty. No one behind me. No movement. No shadow in the corner. Just wigs and mirrors and the dull reflection of my own face staring back at me from cracked glass. The part of my mind that wanted to survive took over. It didn't scream. It didn't panic. It didn't run. It made me do something quieter and stranger. It made me act normal. I set the cigarette down like it was nothing. I let my hands move calmly. I adjusted my bag strap. I walked out of the green room without looking around too much, without staring into corners, without giving the room the satisfaction of knowing it had gotten to me. I walked back down the hallway. My footsteps echoed again, and I kept my pace steady, even though my heart was trying to crawl out of my chest. The guy behind the bar didn't look up when I passed him. That was the last detail that made my skin crawl, because it felt like he knew something and simply didn't care. Outside in the alley, I stood near the bins and forced myself to swallow. My hands were shaking slightly. I hated that. I hate feeling small. I held the cigarette between my fingers for a second, then tossed it hard into one of the bins. I watched it land. I watched it disappear into the dark mouth of trash. I remember that clearly. Then I walked away. I went home and tried to forget it. I told myself I'd proven what I needed to prove, that the place was just a place, and the cigarette was just a cigarette, and my nerves were making meaning out of nothing. That was 2 days ago. Last night, I was getting ready at a completely different venue. Different part of the city, different staff, different performers, different dressing room. Nothing connected to the Velvet Haze. I didn't even take the same route there. I went straight from my flat to the new place and focused on my usual pre-show routine because routine is the only thing that keeps you from spiraling. I was halfway through doing my makeup when I smelled it again. That perfume. Powdery, old-fashioned, too strong for the size of the room. It hit the back of my throat and made my skin prickle. It was so clear and familiar that I turned immediately, expecting someone to be standing right behind me. There was no one there. The room was full of people, but no one was close enough to me to explain the smell. And it wasn't on anyone else's clothes the way a normal perfume would be. It felt like it was in the air itself, like it had been poured into the room and left to hang. I told myself it was in my head. Then I checked my bag. I don't know why I checked my bag. I hadn't lost anything. I hadn't put anything new in it. But something in me needed to confirm what was real and what wasn't. Inside, tucked beside my makeup pouch, was the cigarette. The same one. Same lipstick smear on the filter. I stared at it until my eyes started to sting, because my brain kept trying to rewrite what I was seeing. It kept trying to tell me I must have picked it up without thinking, that I must have shoved it into my bag absent-mindedly, that I was mistaken about throwing it away. But I know I threw it away. I know I watched it land in the bin. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. If you work in nightlife, you learn quickly what people do when you act weird. They smile politely. They avoid you. They decide you're unstable. You lose bookings. You become a story other performers tell each other. So I left the cigarette where it was and finished getting ready with steady hands, as if I hadn't just found proof that something was touching my things. I went on stage. I did my job. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I let people believe I was confident and untouchable, because that's part of the work. Inside, I felt like I was being followed by a smell. This morning, I woke up and the perfume was in my flat. Not overwhelming at first, just there, faint but clear, like it had soaked into the air overnight. My place has its own smells: clean laundry, coffee grounds, the soap I use. The perfume didn't match any of them. It didn't belong. I opened the windows, thinking maybe it was coming from outside. Someone in the building smoking. Someone wearing too much fragrance in the hallway. I let cold air in. I let city noise in. It didn't go away. And about an hour ago, I walked into my bathroom and saw the mirror fogged up. The room wasn't steamy. I hadn't showered. I hadn't even been in there for hours. The mirror looked like someone had breathed on it, close enough to coat it with condensation. There was writing in the fog. Not bold marker or lipstick, just the clear trail of a finger dragged through mist. My brain didn't even give me time to think. I wiped it away immediately, instinctively, like you wipe a spider off your skin before you even register what it is. But I saw enough. One word. Finally. I stood there with my hand pressed against the glass, fingers spread, staring at my own reflection through the smear I'd made. My throat felt tight. My heart beat hard and slow, the way it does when you realize you're in trouble, but you still don't know what kind. I don't think she was lonely. I think she was waiting. And I think I brought her back with me when I walked into that dressing room and picked up what she left behind. The smell is stronger now. It's not just in the bathroom. It's in the kitchen, the hallway, the bedroom. It's like it's settling into the corners the way smoke does, clinging to fabric, sinking into paint. I don't smoke. I never have. But there's ash on my kitchen counter. A thin scatter of gray that wasn't there earlier. A small, careless spill like someone tapped a cigarette over the edge of an invisible ashtray. I've checked my windows. I've checked my locks. I've checked under the sink, behind the shower curtain, inside the closet. Because once fear gets into you, it makes you do stupid things just to feel like you've taken action. No one is here. And that's the problem. Because this doesn't feel like someone breaking in. It feels like someone arriving. I don't know what to do now. I don't know if I should leave my flat and go somewhere crowded, or if that's what it wants, if bringing other people close would make it easier for it to hide. I don't know if I should call someone, because how do you explain a smell that follows you and a cigarette that refuses to stay thrown away? All I know is that the word in my mirror wasn't a threat. It was a confirmation, like something that has been patient for a long time has finally gotten what it needed. Story 6. I don't know where to start, but the mirror in my hallway is broken. When I say broken, I don't mean cracked or warped or ready to fall off the wall. I mean it doesn't work correctly. I know what mirrors do. I've used them my whole life. This one has started doing something else. And whatever it is, it's getting worse. My apartment has a short hallway that leads to the front door. It's narrow, kind of pointless space, so I tried to make it look nicer. I bought a mirror that was slightly overpriced and hung it above a small credenza, one of those half-table, half-cabinet things. I keep a bowl on it for my keys. The mirror was more for the look than anything, but it's been useful for last-second checks on my way out the door. A few weeks ago, I had an interview. A big one. The kind where you tell yourself not to panic, and then you panic anyway. I was obsessing over everything. My suit, my hair, the angle of my collar. The tie alone took 40 minutes and 3 different YouTube videos. I checked myself in every reflective surface I could find. Bathroom mirror, toaster, even the kitchen window. Nothing looked right until I had stared long enough. That didn't stop when I headed out the door. As I passed the hallway mirror, I stopped again to adjust my tie one last time. I pulled the knot snug against my collar, shifted it side to side, and watched my reflection do the same. I centered it and gave it that final tug people do when they're satisfied. Only my reflection did that final tug first. A proud expression spread across his face. like he'd finished the job, and a confused expression settled over mine because my hands were still holding the knot. His hands had already moved away. While I was still gripping the tie against my collar, he was reaching down toward the bowl for the keys. I remember my fingers loosening without me deciding to, like my hands were obeying him. I relaxed my grip. My reflection turned toward the door and started to walk away. And I followed. Not right away, not instantly, but like I was being pulled along by the idea of what I was supposed to do next. I glanced down at my tie, straightened it even though it was already straight, then reached for the doorknob. By the time my hand touched the handle, my heart was hammering. I just stood there with my palm on the metal and took a few slow breaths. It was nerves, I told myself. It had to be. The interview mattered. I had moved here for this. Stress makes your brain do stupid things. My eyes were tired. My mind was racing. I had seen what I expected to see. So I brushed it off, left the apartment, and rode the bus. I got the job. That should have been the end of it. When I got the offer and the relief hit, it washed everything else out of my head. By the time I made it back home, I was thinking about paychecks and groceries, and how maybe for the first time in a while, I could breathe. When I opened my apartment door, the place even looked brighter, like the walls had more light in them. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's how it felt. Like the apartment had become something I could actually afford to live in. I walked down the hall, and I caught the mirror out of the corner of my eye. My reflection was already at the credenza, already tossing his keys into the bowl. I slowed down, staring. As I reached the edge of the mirror's frame, I watched him step out the other side, like he had moved past the glass and into the space beyond it. He ended up a few feet ahead of me, deeper down the hallway. Then, a second later, I dropped my keys into the bowl. Only then did I realize I was walking faster than normal. My footsteps sounded heavier. I had sped up without thinking, like I was trying to catch up to him. The next thing I knew, I had reached the end of the hallway and stopped. I turned around and looked back at the mirror, trying to understand what I had just seen. My phone rang. The screen lit up with my sister's name. I saw my face reflected in the dark glass of the phone screen, that same mix of concern and confusion, leaning more toward confusion. I answered. She congratulated me, loud and happy, and for a few minutes I let myself be pulled back into normal life. After the call, I went to the bathroom and washed my face. The bathroom mirror was normal. For a moment, everything lined up again. When I raised a hand, my reflection raised a hand. When I leaned forward, it leaned forward. I looked as tired as I felt. I went to bed telling myself I had imagined the hallway thing. I fell asleep thinking about my first day at the new job, about being early, about not messing up. The next morning, I woke up late. I rushed. I threw on clothes, grabbed my bag, and ran out the door. I don't even remember looking at the hallway mirror. I don't remember seeing it at all. After 8 hours of onboarding, I came home and checked it. My keys slipped out of my hand and hit the floor. The mirror stared back at me, empty. The hallway was there. The credenza was there. The bowl was there. The light was on. Everything was exactly as it should be. But there was no reflection of me. I stared at it until my eyes started to burn. I stepped side to side, closer, farther. Changing angles like that would make me pop back into existence. Nothing. The mirror showed the apartment behind me, but not me. The first thought that came was the scariest one, because it was the only explanation that fit the feeling. I've lost my mind. That's it, I told myself. I've had some kind of break. The stress of moving, the job hunt, being alone. Something finally snapped. Then another thought followed, quieter, but just as sharp. But people who lose their mind don't know it, do they? If I'm aware enough to think I'm having a breakdown, doesn't that mean I'm not? That didn't help. That only made me feel trapped inside my own head. I ran to the bathroom mirror. My face was there, wide-eyed, panicked. The kitchen window reflected me too, because it was dark outside, and the glass had turned into a black mirror. I grabbed a cup, filled it with water, and drank too fast. My face warped in the curve of the glass, distorted, but still present. I stood in the kitchen, breathing hard, trying to ground myself. My legs felt weak. My hands were cold. The mirror is broken. As stupid as it sounded, that's what I landed on. Not me, not my eyes, not my brain. The mirror. For the next 2 weeks, I lived with that idea like it was a splint holding something in place. I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't Google it. I didn't ask a friend to come over and look, because the thought of someone else standing in my hallway and seeing what I saw made me feel sick. Every time I caught my reflection in anything else, it calmed me down. Bathroom mirror, microwave door, phone screen, car windows. Every normal reflection felt like proof that I wasn't crazy. Eventually, I stopped checking the hallway mirror entirely. It became background decor again, just something on the wall that didn't matter. I grabbed my keys and left. I came home and walked past it. It was easier that way. It faded into routine, like the bus schedule posted at the stop outside. It was there. It could change someday. But I didn't need it to. And honestly, most mornings I don't really want to be reminded that time only goes one direction. I guess it didn't matter that I wasn't paying attention. Time kept going anyway. This morning, the mirror started working again. I didn't mean to look. I had stopped paying attention to it, like I said. But something caught my peripheral vision as I walked toward the door. My chest tightened before my brain even registered what I'd seen. I let out a sharp breath and realized I'd been holding my breath like I'd been underwater. I knew I was going to have to look. And as much as I wish he hadn't been there, he was. My reflection was on his way in while I was on my way out. He wore the same outfit I was wearing, the gray button-up, the khakis. Only his were ruined. There was a boot print stamped across his shirt just below his rib cage, like someone had kicked him hard and left the mark behind. The fabric was torn. Grease and dirt streaked across him in long smears. His face looked battered. One eye was swollen shut, purple and angry. The other eye stared straight ahead. What wasn't scraped or bruised looked older, not just tired. Older, like time had settled into his skin. He was leaning against the credenza as if he couldn't stand up straight. He stared forward, not at the door, not at the keys, not at the hallway, like he was waiting for his body to remember what to do next. My eyes met his. Mine to his, not his to mine. That's the only way I can explain it. There was no recognition in his expression. He didn't react the way a person reacts when they lock eyes with themselves. It felt like two pieces of film overlapping, two moments placed on top of each other without merging. He lifted a hand and wiped at his injured eye. A tear cut through a thin line of blood and left a clean track down his cheek. He stared at his fingers afterward, then pressed gently against the bruises like he was checking what still hurt. I looked down just to look away. I needed a break from his face, from the evidence of whatever had happened to him. My hand tightened around my keys so hard it hurt. When I glanced back up, we had both bowed our heads. At least I had. With him, it looked like something similar, like his head had dipped in the same heavy way, like the weight of it was too much to hold up. Then we lifted our heads. Our eyes met again. We stood there like that for a second that felt stretched out, the air in the hallway thick and still. Then, without either of us changing expression, we moved. He went deeper into the apartment. I went out the front door. I shut it behind me and walked down the building's hallway. But something about that moment came with me, like a smell that gets into your clothes, like a sound that keeps ringing in your ears after it stops. The empty mirror had been easier. This happened maybe 20 minutes ago. I'm on the bus now, typing this with my phone held too tight. My chest still feels tight. I keep trying to focus on normal things, emails, work, the day ahead, but I can't stop thinking about him. I keep checking my reflection in the bus window, in the dark glass of passing cars, in my phone screen. Every time I see myself, it's a small relief. But it doesn't settle the fear. Because I don't know what happened to the version of me I saw in that mirror. I don't know if it works like that, either. I don't know if the mirror is showing me something that will happen, or something that already did, or something that happens every time I'm not looking. And now, every time the bus taps its brakes, it feels too close, like we're about to hit something, like everything is lined up and waiting on me, for me to get off the bus. I keep telling myself I'm just on edge, that I'm spiraling, that my brain is turning a weird morning into a whole nightmare. But these two guys behind me haven't stopped staring since I got on. I can hear them talking under their breath to each other. Not loud enough to make out clearly, but enough to know it's happening. Maybe it's nothing. But what if it isn't? What if the mirror wasn't showing me some random broken reflection? What if it was showing me what happens when I make it home? Story 7. My grandpa's last advice to me was a sentence I didn't understand until years later. Live as if you were living already for the second time, he told me, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. He said it like a warning, not like a motivational quote. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clear. He held my hand with the last of his strength, and it felt like he was trying to pass something into me, something heavier than grief. Then he was gone, and I was left with that line echoing in my head, turning over and over like a stone in my pocket. My grandpa was a great man in the way that mattered inside our family. Everything he did for his children and his grandchildren. He wanted us fed, warm, clean, educated. He wanted us to have choices. When he talked about success, he didn't mean money for the sake of money. He meant stability. A home that didn't feel like it could disappear overnight. A future that wasn't built on panic. He used to tell me, more than once, that if we turned out okay, then he'd done his job. That if his family could stand on their own feet, then his life had been worth it. I was proud to call him my role model. I still am. I'm the woman I became because of him. When I was younger, I asked his advice on everything. School, friends, decisions I didn't know how to make. And he would listen with this patience that made you feel like your little problems were worth his time. Then he'd give me some small piece of wisdom, and somehow it would stick. He was my Santa when I was a kid. Not in the silly way. He didn't spoil me with expensive gifts. He gave kindness. He made you feel safe. He made the house feel like a place where the world couldn't reach you. But there was another version of him, one he didn't show most people. In his youth, my grandpa had been someone else entirely. He told me that himself, and he only ever admitted it to me and my grandma. He said that when he was young, he didn't care about right and wrong. He did whatever he wanted, and anyone who got in his way paid for it. He didn't talk about it like he was bragging. He talked about it like he was describing an illness he used to have, something that lived in him for a long time, something he didn't fully control, something that made him dangerous. I was 14 when he first sat me down and told me the part of the story that mattered. It was an ordinary evening, the kind where you expect dinner and TV and then bed. But my grandpa called for me to join him and my grandma at the table, and the seriousness in his voice made my stomach tighten. Before I even walked into the room, I remember feeling reluctant, and I remember trying to pretend I wasn't nervous. The moment I saw their faces, I knew something was different. They looked older than usual, not physically, just heavier, like people who had been carrying a secret for too long and finally decided to set it down. They noticed my anxiety right away. My grandma reached for my hand and squeezed it gently, and my grandpa told me quickly that I wasn't in trouble. "We're not scolding you," my grandma said. "We just need to talk." My grandpa leaned forward, elbows on the table, and studied me for a second. "Rebecca," he said, "how old are you today?" 14, I answered. "Already," he murmured, shaking his head. "Damn, you grow like a weed, girl. It feels like yesterday we were walking through the woods and you could barely keep up with me. Now it feels like I can barely keep up with you." He tried to smile, but it didn't last. He glanced at my grandma, and then the tone in the room changed completely. "Time only moves forward," he said. "You can't stop it. We're getting old, Rebecca. We can hardly do the work needed on our property anymore. Soon we might have to hire the neighbors to help, and that costs money. Money we still don't have the way we should." He paused there like he was deciding how honest to be. "That's why we called you. Because we want you to help with some of the work. But before that, you need to be informed about some unusual things in our village." When he said unusual, his face hardened. The light in the kitchen didn't change, but everything felt dimmer anyway. "You have to pay close attention," he said, and his voice got sharp enough to make me sit straighter. "Don't treat this like one of those comics you read all day. This is real, and it's serious." My grandma sighed in a way that sounded tired down to the bones. "Whatever we tell her, she's going to think it's a story," she said quietly. My grandpa snapped his head toward her. "Shush," he barked. "Don't interrupt me." It shocked me. He rarely spoke to her like that in front of me. Then he said something worse, something that changed the air in the room completely. "If she doesn't listen," he said, "she will die. Is that what you want?" My grandma stared at him, tight-lipped, and I remember the silence that followed. It wasn't dramatic silence. It was the silence of people who have lived with fear long enough that they don't need to explain it. My grandpa looked back at me. "Listen," he said, "calmer now, but heavier. At some point in your life, you might feel the need to come back here, to build something here, to live here again. That's why we're telling you how things work, so you'll be prepared." At 14, I thought, there's no way. I remember thinking it clearly. I wasn't going to move back to a village where, as my grandpa liked to say, the fox and the hare say good night to each other. There were no kids my age, nothing to do, no future. I'd die of boredom before anything else killed me. I didn't say it out loud. I just sat there nodding like a good granddaughter. My grandpa rubbed his hands together like he was warming them. "You know we aren't a very religious family," he said. "We never forced that stuff on you, especially not me. I don't think God created everything. But I do think something designed this world. Whatever that is, who knows?" He glanced at my grandma like he couldn't help himself. "Your grandma is more religious. She thinks God will send an angel to make things right in this village." That, mumbo jumbo. My grandma shot him a look so sharp it could have cut glass. For the first time, I noticed sweat at my grandpa's hairline, like even he understood he was stepping on something dangerous. "Anyway," he said quickly, shifting, "I won't drag it out. Here's the deal. In our village, there are, let's call them entities. They have rules, and those rules must be followed exactly. No exceptions." He leaned closer. "I'm going to explain the most important ones. Listen carefully." He lifted one finger. First rule: if you ever come across a hound with an old hag's face, an old face like you can't even imagine, no matter what, you greet it by saying, "It's a nice day, isn't it?" He stared at me until I nodded, then continued. "I don't care if it's raining. I don't care if it's snowing. I don't care if the world is ending. You tell it, it's a nice day, isn't it?" Then you give it canned food and a bottle of alcohol. My stomach turned. I wanted to laugh because it sounded ridiculous, but the look on his face killed the urge. "You wait for it to finish," he said. "After that, you say, 'This was a pleasant meeting. I'm looking forward to the next one.' Then you can leave." He held up his hand like he was stopping me from asking questions. "But if the hag tries to talk to you," he said, voice low, "you ignore it. It never happened. You didn't hear anything. You understand me?" I nodded again, slower. "If you don't do these things," he said, "within a couple of days you will cease to be human." He said it like he was describing a medical fact, like it was an outcome he'd seen before. He lifted a second finger. "Second rule is more complicated. This one involves two entities." He paused. "Do you remember the old well? The one we used before we built our well on the property? The one we sent you to sometimes for water?" I nodded. Of course I remembered. The old well had always made me uneasy. Even in daylight, it felt wrong, like the stone around it was stained with old fear. "Good," he said. "If you ever see a very tall man with a blurred face, and it asks you to bring it water, you bring the water from the old well and nowhere else." His voice hardened. "Trust me," he said. "You don't want to find out what happens if you bring it water from another place." Then he told me the words I would have to say at the well. He made me repeat them back to him until he was satisfied I could say them without stumbling. Larry cannot get me, for I am protected. I am loved. I am fed. I belong to a family." 3 times, he said. "Say it 3 times. Then it should be safe to bring the water." I remember how carefully he said "should," like even rules didn't come with full guarantees. "And after you do it," he said, "you return home. But before you enter the house, you walk the stairs to the entrance backwards 3 times. Only after that is it safe to come inside." My grandma sat quietly through all of it, her hands folded tight as if she was holding herself together. I could tell she didn't like him telling me these things, but she didn't stop him either. That scared me more than the rules did. My grandpa lowered his fingers. "There are other entities," he said. "There's a list. Your grandma has it in one of her books. But I wanted to tell you the most important ones today." He took a long breath, and his gaze went distant for a second, like he was looking at a memory he hated. "Now the third one," he said. "The last one I'll talk about." He didn't raise a finger this time. His hands stayed flat on the table, and his voice changed. "There is no rule," he said. "There is no escape. If he comes for you, you are screwed no matter what." My throat went dry. "Once there was a man," my grandpa said, "who did terrible things to the people of this village. Atrocities so bad it would make the devil blush." He swallowed, and for the first time I saw fear in him that didn't look like performance. "When he died," he said, "he became something worse. He was a nightmare in life, and he's a nightmare in death." He leaned in, close enough that I could smell dinner on his breath. "This man looks ordinary," he said. "Young, handsome. So handsome you'll feel pulled toward him. You'll want to talk to him. You'll want to befriend him. You'll want to tell him things you never tell anyone." I felt my skin prickle, because even at 14 I understood that kind of charm, the kind that doesn't feel like your choice. "After you talk to him," my grandpa continued, "you'll feel energized, younger, like anything is possible." Then his expression tightened. "But later, you will feel violent urges," he said. "You'll be compelled to do unspeakable things to anyone you see. After that, you will have memory lapses. You'll wake up in places you don't remember going to." He paused, and his eyes fixed on my face, as if he needed me to truly see him. Then you'll notice something moving under your skin, he said. And finally, your appearance will change, and you'll realize you've become him. Your consciousness will drift away, and what's left is the man. I couldn't speak. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. Then my grandpa said, softly, fortunately for you, you don't have to worry about him. He only comes for those who are truly wicked. My shoulders loosened slightly, just for a second. And then he finished the thought. That's why I'm telling you this, Rebecca, he said. Because there's nobody more wicked than me, my grandma made a small sound, like she'd been punched in the chest. My grandpa didn't look at her. He stared down at the wood grain of the table and started talking like he was confessing to a judge. When I was young, he said, I did unholy things. I hurt people. I enjoyed their misery. I was disgusting. I wanted to be exactly like that man. I wanted to be terror. I wanted those people to go to sleep and see my face hurting them and everyone they loved. He shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't believe he was talking about himself. It was like a drug, he said. I couldn't stop. Then he told me about a boy who lived across from them when he was young. A child he targeted over and over. Not once, not a few times, but constantly. He said he tormented that boy every moment he could. He said he broke him, not just physically, but inside. He said he mutilated him until the boy became a terror too. But unlike me, my grandpa said, voice rough, he still had a fragment of humanity. And that fragment helped him find a girlfriend. My grandpa's mouth twitched in a way that made me feel sick. Not amusement, exactly. Something dark. And you can imagine my delight when I found out, he said. He looked up then, and I saw shame fighting with the memory. I told you there's no escape, he said. That's not entirely true. You can't escape the curse. But you can escape becoming him. He explained it like it was a trick, a loophole in a law older than the village. The way you avoid turning into him, he said, is by showing him a photo of someone else. Then that person becomes the next target. My stomach dropped. He didn't wait for me to ask. He said it plainly. I told that boy, my grandpa said, that if he showed a photo of his girlfriend to him, all the abuse would be over. He swallowed. And the boy was desperate enough to agree. After that, he said, he never heard what happened to them. The girl, the boy, their families moved away. Never seen again. No closure. Just a hole in the village's history, and a man who lived long enough to regret what he'd done, but not long enough to fix it. When he finished, he broke. I'd never seen my grandpa cry like that. Not quiet tears. Full body crying. He hit his own head with his hands and called himself a monster. He said the word monster wasn't even strong enough. He said he deserved whatever was coming. And then, years later, whatever was coming did come. I wasn't there when he died. My grandma was. She told me later, in a voice so flat it sounded like she had to numb herself to speak at all. Right after he took his last breath, she heard a sound like breaking branches. Bones snapping, flesh tearing, something wet and violent. She said my grandpa's body twisted in a way a body shouldn't twist. She said he turned inside out. She said it like she was describing weather. Like if she let emotion into it, she would lose her mind. For a long time after that dinner when I was 14, I forced myself to believe it was just a story. A harsh lesson dressed up as folklore. A way to scare me into respecting the village and listening to my grandparents. People do that, right? They exaggerate. They make myths to keep kids safe. But as I got older, that line my grandpa said, the one about living like it's your second time, started to feel less like advice and more like instructions. because now I'm 32, and I feel the pull he predicted. Life in the city has its own kind of loneliness, the kind where you can be surrounded by people and still feel like you don't belong anywhere. After a while, you start thinking about land, family property, quiet, roots. You start thinking about returning and building something stable, something that feels like it can't be taken away. And I hate admitting this, but I want to go back. Not for nostalgia, not for romance, for practicality, for money, for a future. The exact reasons my grandpa said would bring me back. The problem is, I believe him now. I believe that Village has rules that don't care whether you believe in them. I believe there are things there that act like systems, predictable if you obey, deadly if you don't. And I believe the worst one isn't a hound with an old face, or a tall man by an old well. I believe the worst one is the handsome man who makes you feel alive before he turns you into him. And the part that keeps me awake at night is this. My grandpa said he only comes for the truly wicked. My grandpa also said there was nobody more wicked than him. So if I go back, what does that make me? What does that mean about what's already in me, what I might inherit, what I might repeat without meaning to? I wrote all of this because I can feel myself reaching for that village anyway. I can feel myself planning it, imagining it, pretending it's just a move. And I'm terrified that the moment I step back onto that land, the village will remember my family. Or worse, something in the village will recognize me as the second time.